Is agreeable, we'll go ahead and get the meeting called to order. Today is Monday, July 26, 2021, and this is the 1915C Home and Community-Based Services Waiver Redesign Task Force. This is our second meeting, and I would love it if the secretary could call the roll.
Senator Carroll.
Present remotely from my district.
Thank you. Senator Meredith.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Senator Parrott. Sorry about that. Representative Elliott.
I am present remotely from the district.
Thank you. Representative Kirk McCormick.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Stevenson.
Present remotely from the district.
Thank you. Chairman Adams. Here. Chairman Riley.
This is Senator Parrott. Could you hear me?
We do now. Thank you.
Now, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'm present from my home.
Thank you, Senator Parrott. Okay,
Yes,
it looks like we have a quorum and we are constituted to do some business. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. I have a motion of the minutes of the June 21st, 2021 meeting. I have a motion and I have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is item number 3, the importance of waiver services and barriers to care. We have a personal testimony today. We have Shirley Haberman. She's the mother of a 1915C waiver recipient, and I think Shirley is joining us remotely. Just unmute. Shirley, can you unmute?
Now, can you hear me?
You got it. We can hear you. Please
Okay.
proceed. Or why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and then proceed?
Okay, my name is Shirley Haberman. As you said, I am a mother of Stephen Haberman. He's 46 years old, and I will proceed to give you some, probably more information than you care to hear. I'd like to thank the committee for this invitation to share our family story. It has been a long one. Please bear with me if I sound nervous, because I really am. This is kind of out of my comfort zone. So I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to begin my story with this. It's a little medical background on Stephen. We first noticed Stephen missing developmental milestones in early infancy. And I'd like to give you a little bit of that medical background. So hopefully you may understand the intensity of his need in our medically complex Superman. The first doctor we saw told us he had cerebral palsy, and he sent us to Child Evaluation Center here in Louisville for further diagnostic testing at approximately 8 to 10 months old. After numerous tests, his full diagnosis is he has spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy with severe intellectual and developmental disabilities. He is nonverbal, and he started out from birth with what they call infantile spasms, which progressed into a rare form of irretractable epilepsy called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which makes him a high candidate for SUDEP, which is a sudden, unexpected death in epilepsy patients. We have lived with this fear his whole life. He is visually impaired. He has Lukey rods in his back for scoliosis from the base of his neck down to his pelvis. Stephen has had a feeding tube placed in about 10 years ago because of dysphagia and aspiration while oral eating. He has a vagus nerve stimulator, which is known as a VNS implant, to help with seizures. He has a baclofen pump implant to help with spasticity. Stephen has severe reflux disease, which doesn't respond well to medications and has resulted in several bouts of esophagitis. Stephen has sleep apnea, which when he was first diagnosed, we tried CPAP for over a year, and it didn't help him at all because he could not be compliant. Plus, it was about to kill mom and dad because we were up every 15 minutes all through the night to reseat it. So he now has a tracheostomy that works well for this issue. Stephen has a neurogenic bowel and bladder, which means neither system functions like they should without mechanical intervention. He now has to be catheterized 3 times a day because he has had kidney stone surgery removal. He has a bowel program several times a week, which I will spare you all the details on that. But it must be strictly adhered to because in the past he has had many impactions which required hospital visits. He has joint contractures on all 4 of his limbs, which require a rotation of braces on a daily basis. And I hope I haven't bored or overwhelmed you with all of this technical medical information, but this is our reality. On a lighter note, I thought this was quite amusing. When I was having a discussion with one of Stephen's doctors on one of his many health issues, he asked me, he says, "Are you a nurse?" And I said, "Oh, no, sir, I'm not, but I've played one for 40 plus years." So Stephen has lived at home with his parents from birth until April of 1999, when we bought a house 4 doors down from us about a year after he finished high school. We are one of the first in Louisville to take advantage of a program through community living and metro housing. We became his Section 8 landlords. He has lived in this home for 22 years. This was supposed to be his long-term life plan when we are no longer here to care for him. As of now, it's hard for us to see this as a workable plan for Stephen in the future. Due to rigid cookie cutter funding of significantly different levels of disability, it makes it almost impossible to support him 24/7. I'd like to give you an example of this cookie cutter mentality in the different waivers. Years ago, when Stephen had the Michelle P. waiver, I found out someone that we knew very well was getting the exact same budget as we were. This person that Medicaid was supporting through the Michelle P. could walk, talk, dress and feed himself, toilet independently, and he had a very mild intellectual disability. His funding through Michelle P. was basically for community outings so he could socialize and have fun. Our same budget was for services to help keep our son alive. I'd like to give the committee some quick basic figures on what support we're currently receiving and the need that we still have. Please keep in mind that Stephen is 24/7 skilled nursing level of care. There are 168 hours in a week. So through participant-directed services, he gets 24 hours a week for day use. Heart-supported living, we use 22.5 hours for overnight on the weekends. And we have now, probably in the last year, found a program called the Special Needs Nursing Plan. We are using 32 hours for overnight support 4 nights a week. That's a total of 89.5 out of that 168. The hours left that we work, my husband and I, are 78.5 hours a week on average. That is 12 and a half hours a day. My husband and I are in our 70s now with health issues of our own. How many people do you know that still work 12 and a half hours a day in their 70s? Some of these work hours that we fill in are due to lack of employees, which we know now is a problem for everybody, but was even a problem before COVID. In the past, Stephen has been on home and community-based waiver, and we have done the consumer directed options, the CDO. These waivers have helped immensely, but they have never fully met his level of support. The rule of only getting 16 hours a day, no overnight hours, because they say he don't need it, he's asleep. Well, they don't realize how much mom and dad are up with him every night, is absurd for someone with his level of need. I have been told the figure to house a person in an ICF facility is pushing close to $500,000 a year. I would like to commend and applaud this committee for trying to research and revamp these waivers. We would never have been able to support Stephen in his own home this long without them. For that, we are eternally grateful. The major barriers that we see as a family to his care is the unwillingness for Medicaid to be flexible in different levels of care. Let me give you an example. Stephen has been out of his adult day program, which we greatly relied on for our respite during the day from his care. He's been out since COVID shut the day program down. They finally resumed program a while back, but we have had to choose not to send Stephen back because he's not vaccinated due to multiple extenuating health issues. We have tried and tried to get virtual day program for him at home. Socializing with his peers is on his plan of care, but it's not being carried out. Medicaid has given us the usual runaround. Yes, it's covered. No, it's not covered. They say they can't do it because it would be double billing to pay staff person to assist him with the virtual day program. He is not able to manipulate an iPad or any other device on his own. So he must have someone else's hands to help. We have contacted Adult Protection and Advocacy to help us find out why. Because we know for a fact that paid staff residences have had virtual day program all during COVID. We want to know what's the difference. We would love to see Medicaid step out of the box of cookie cutter services and get creative. I know parents right now who are in the same situation as us, who are more than willing to participate in a pilot program. Both sets of these parents have advocated for their loved ones their whole life and have put in more hours to help those dreams become reality than you can imagine. We have 2 profoundly disabled adults who could share a patio home with 2 to 3 nursing shifts and a CNA or another support person, plus parents pitching in per shift. Pretty sure it could be done for less than $500,000 a year. We are the baby boomers who are swiftly approaching the day that we ourselves will need support. And our children are right behind us. I thank you for listening to my heart's cry for not only my son, but for the many who are out there who are waiting for change. My prayer is that this committee that works so diligently to make the waiver services better and more equitable for all, that you will be blessed. God bless you from a grateful mother's heart. Thank you so much. And I would be glad to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Shirley. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. And I so wish that you were alone in that story. But like you said, you're not alone in that story. And it is really incumbent upon us and in conjunction with Medicaid to try to find a path forward. And so again, I thank you very much for your testimony. I think one of the things that you said that was so poignant was cookie cutter. And I couldn't think of a better way to characterize kind of what we're doing as a cookie cutter. And I think that we have such talent, both in the administration and in this legislature, to do better than cookie cutter. We have a lot of talent. We have a lot of ideas. It's just a matter of initiative, and it's a matter of funding. And all of those, I think, are not barriers that can't be overcome. And so part of the reason I think we have this task force and we're continuing to beat this drum is because we have to do better for people like you, and we have to do better for your son. And you've given at least me a lot to think about. I don't know if any of the committee members have anything they would like to contribute. Senator Meredith?
Ms. Haberman, I want to thank you as well for your testimony. It's
You're welcome.
well, God bless you. You're certainly, you and your husband are angels walking on the face of the earth, and I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish. And
We're just parents who love their son.
well, I can share your frustration, and I understand it. And I think part of the problem, and it's going to be a part of the mission of this task force, is when we look at funding, that I kind of sense that the waiver is the last thing we fund rather than the first thing we fund, and it shouldn't be that way. And most folks on this committee have served with me on other committees where I've talked about this year we'll spend $14 billion on the Medicaid program, and that really should be enough money to take care of everybody's needs if we spend it the right way. And you've already alluded to that, we got to think outside the box. There's different ways of doing this. And through COVID, we've been forced a little bit with telemedicine. That's something we didn't embrace until this happened, and we had to embrace it and found out, it works pretty good, and it's a cost-effective way of doing things. And there are hundreds of ways we can do this different, do it better, do it more efficient, productive, but we get caught up in our own bureaucracy here, and really it's just, session after session we do the same things. We know that it has to be addressed. That's one of the reasons for this task force, but it really helps when people like you are willing to step forward and share your story, as difficult as it is. And I just want to commend you for that, and I want you to know that you've been successful today, at least in conveying to this legislator that we need to make this a priority and give you an answer rather than just kicking the can down the road. So just want to thank you. Wish you the best. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Meredith. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much again, Shirley. We will be talking.
Thank you all.
Hold on. We're not done yet.
Sure.
Representative Elliott has a question.
Okay.
Daniel, are you still on? Oh, okay.
Madam
Hold on.
Chair.
Senator Carroll, please proceed.
Yeah, that may have been, I think it shows up, Daniel. Madam Chair, thank you. And ma'am, thank you for your testimony on this. There's a couple comments that I'd like to make. I think we've heard a lot of talk from the cabinet about the a la carte services and getting away from the cookie cutter from each waiver, and actually basing the services on the needs of each individual. And I think that is absolutely the correct path as we move forward. And I would hope that would help that the situation you have could be addressed better. And I do think from a provider's standpoint, and ma'am, I run a facility that is a waiver provider, so I understand the comments that you're making. And I think that there are adjustments that can be made and some variations of different programs that are more specific to the needs of each individual. And then the other comment that I want to make, as far as the adult day programs, I think it's important for the committee to know right now that a lot of programs are still under restrictions, but it's by their own choice. The cabinet has sent out recommendations or guidance. There are no regulations that I'm aware of related to mask. It is up to each individual agency to decide how they want to do that. In our case, we are requiring those who have not been vaccinated to wear a mask unless there is a medical or reason due to the disability that they can't wear the mask. And that is how we have approached it. And we created policy to cover that. So that's kind of where we are. So whatever center your son is at, ma'am, I think that's a decision that they have made, and they do have the ability, even though it may not comply with the guidance, it is not under regulation right now, and there is some flexibility to make some concessions to serve more individuals. And in our case, we felt like that our folks staying at home longer periods of time and the isolation that they've had to undergo put them more at a risk in coming back to our center. And since we've done that, we haven't had any issues. We're very careful about sanitizing and other aspects of safety, but that is a choice center by center. And that's all I have to say, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, if there are no further questions or comments, we will go ahead and move on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the update on the Appendix K Waiver Amendment. So we do have some folks from the administration. If you all could make your way to the table, introduce yourselves for the record, and then proceed with your testimony, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could just address Ms. Haberman while we're getting the presentation up, I just wanted to let you know, I am Pam Smith. I'm the Division Director over Community Alternatives. I oversee all of our 1915C waiver programs. I actually was not familiar with your son's case until we've got the agenda, and I did some research, and I wanted to let you know I noticed there are several services that could be accessed that are not being accessed. For example, some services that would help him participate virtually in adult day training, as well as respite for you and your husband, as well as potentially some private duty nursing on the state plan side. So we have already made contact with your case manager, and I would like to call you after this tomorrow to discuss some of those options and to help you navigate through how to access those services. Because you all are right, cookie cutter does not work, and it is not what these individuals deserve.
Well, I would love that. I would love that. I am open to any assistance we can possibly get.
So I will talk to you at some time tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so again, I am Pam Smith. I'm the Division Director of Community Alternatives with Medicaid, and I oversee all of our 1915C waivers. And then I'll let Claudia introduce herself as well.
I'm Claudia Johnson. I'm the Division Director for the Division of Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities within the Department for Behavioral Health, and we administer 2 of the 1915C waivers for Medicaid.
So today we're going to share some of what Appendix K is. And so first, just to explain what Appendix K is. Appendix K is a standalone appendix that can be enacted within the waiver applications that allow us during times of emergency. So in this case, a pandemic. Also can be used when you have natural disasters, any type of emergency that impacts large groups of people. It allows us to alter what we normally offer through our 1915C waivers to offer additional services. Some of what we can do is waiver access and ability or eligibility. We can address the service menu and the service delivery, provider qualifications, reimbursement and billing, as well as the reporting that we have to do to CMS, which allows us to focus more on service delivery. So a little bit about how we developed our Appendix K. We had cross-agency meetings. So in addition to BDID, or our Department for Behavioral Health and Developmental Intellectual Disabilities, we included DAIL. They administer our HCB program and the participant-directed services options. We received stakeholder feedback. We talked with a lot of other states, and all of that grew into what became our Appendix K. In March of 2020, our first Appendix K was approved. Initially, we could only submit them for a year time frame, so we did that, received the full year approval. It expired March 5th of 2021. On March 24th, we had renewal of our second Appendix K, which retroactive back to make sure there was no gap in coverage. And at this time, due to the state of the pandemic, they allowed us to request an end date that's up to 6 months after the public health emergency ends. So that gives us the time that once the public emergency is declared over, it'll give us time to transition everybody back to what their normal services were or what their new plans of care need to look like. To talk about what we did, the updates for Appendix K and what we did, we increased limits on certain services. So that meant that we allowed for more than the normal. If there was a cap of a limit, like a 40-hour a week cap or 16 units a day, we said with cause those could be services could be provided over those limits, so providers weren't held to those limits. We allowed for overtime to be given to participant-directed employees, which in normal operations is not. We allowed some residential providers, so the family home providers, to access respite and personal assistance, which is not normally a service that they can access. We added home-delivered meals to all waivers except Model 2. Model 2, those are our event-dependent individuals, so there wasn't the need for the home-delivered meals there. But we saw, and you'll see in a couple slides, I'll go through the services, the amount that we saw use of home-delivered meals to an extent that we are going to make sure that we add that into our waivers as we renew them. Telehealth services. So we not only did our case management and assessments via telehealth, but we allowed some of the adult days in the ADT centers that were able to do that, to offer telehealth. We also had some providers that were very innovative, and when they had individuals that were pretty independent on their own, but maybe needed reminders to take their medication, or they needed reminders to turn off the stove if they had fixed something, they would set up and do a Zoom or a Skype session and say, okay, show me your medicine. Show me that you're taking your medicine. They would say, okay, let's show me what you're putting on the stove, or show me what you're fixing yourself. Make sure that things like that the stove got turned off, that, would see that they were actually eating food and not just eating chips or eating something that wasn't of nutritional value, and really give them that support. Even though they still were able to do things independently, they had somebody there just checking in with them. We waived the immediate family member approval process for participant-directed services. For our HCB and SCL, that's an additional step that individuals have to go through before they're allowed to provide PDS services. We have that waived right now, so they can go ahead and sign up and can begin PDS services immediately. In addition, we allowed employees to start work while waiting on background screening results. The caveat to that is that when the background check came back, if there was something of concern on the background check that potentially impacted health, safety, and welfare, that a new employee had to be found immediately. But we found that, in particular with participant-directed services, individuals are hiring people that they know. So they know if there's going to be something that's going to show up in the background. We added our community mental health centers to provide PDS case management and HCB. Right now, that is limited to our aging agency, so that expanded that network by an additional 10 to 12 providers. We allowed waiver services in hospital settings under certain circumstances. And I want to share with you a little bit about the story about how this came about. We have an individual, and he's served in home and community-based waiver. He has cerebral palsy. He has very difficult speech to understand, and he, a lot of times when he gets upset or he's anxious, it looks like he is having a behavior. It looks like he's very frustrated. This individual had surgery. His brother was only able to be at the hospital for limited amounts of time, and unfortunately, because of his inability to communicate, he did not get the pain medicine that he needed, nor did he actually get to eat correctly because the aides would just come in and put the tray in front of him, and he was not able to open the meals. And so when he would get frustrated, they would interpret that as him being angry. And honestly, it was just that he needed help. So we began, that was a new addition with our second renewal of Appendix K, and it is something we're carrying forward in the waivers going forward. We've also allowed an extra unit of case management. So pre-COVID vaccine, most of that was used in connecting people with getting PPE, for finding, all of a sudden now, I don't know how I'm going to get my groceries. I don't have any natural supports. My case manager or my providers are my natural supports. So that allowed those case managers really to step in and do above and beyond what they normally would do. And since the COVID vaccine, they have helped to for individuals to be able to access the vaccine. They've been able to help arrange transportation. They've been able to find vaccine sites. In the beginning, when there were a lot of wait lists, since most of our individuals qualified in the first rounds, they were able to help them sign up for the wait list. Some of them didn't have the computer access to do it, or some just really didn't understand some of the sites, so they were able to help do that. So I want to talk about some of the utilization, and so we have it broken out by the waivers. So for our ABI acute waiver, our total waiver enrollment is 285. We had 584 requests, which represented 197 unique participants and 26 providers. And you'll see the largest amount of that is for the residential service. We allowed residential providers to bill 1.5 times what their normal rate was to account for sometimes, increased behaviors. You can imagine how stir crazy we all went when we're being told you need to stay in your house. Well, when you put individuals that not normally are in their house, that some have behaviors already, it's not a good environment. So that gave them people that could go out on the porch, could go in the backyard, and still have supervision with everybody else, and give those that needed some additional attention. It gave them the staff to be able to do that. And then you see they did access a little bit of the case management support broker services. About 48 people did that, and we had 13 people who received home delivered meals. For our ABI long term, about the same utilization. We had 158 unique people, 29 unique providers, and again, the most used service was that enhanced residential. We did have a few more home delivered meals. We had 34 home delivered meals. HCB. So if this doesn't show a picture of how critical it is for home delivered meals, 5,837 home delivered meals. So we have expanded that to include, currently in our waiver, it was only hot delivered meals. Not everybody wanted a hot delivered meal. Some people wanted a chilled meal or wanted frozen meals where they could get them all at the beginning of the week and then heat them up at their request or when they wanted to receive those. So that is something we have added into the HCB renewal, is expanding the meal providers, expanding the choice. so that hopefully we're able to meet that need more. We had more case management services that were utilized here, and we had just a little bit of overtime in our participant-directed services population. Now with Michelle P., you'll notice we did not have as much. We had about 208 home-delivered meals. We had more of the case management support broker and a little bit of participant-directed overtime. This is largely reflective of the population we serve in Michelle P. Most of them are children, so most of them have natural supports that are there at home that are able to provide those services. For SCL, again, residential was our largest service. We did have some home delivered meals and some overtime for participant directed services, and again, some of that the case management or support broker services. One of the other things that we did in the first round, because the adult day and adult day training centers were closed for a period of time, we issued retainer payments. We, in total, in the 2 different rounds, we issued retainer payments to 81 unique providers for a total of $4.7 million. We also have continued to allow them to do telehealth and to expand the services. We did allow some of the ADHCs provided in-home nursing services and some individual services, and we've seen a lot of innovation by these providers in particular that we are hoping to carry through as we do redesign with some of the telehealth continued offering of that and some of the services that they've done with really getting outside and not just being in a building. So allowing the individuals to have more choice about what they wanted to do. A little bit of information about our participants in COVID. And this is, I have to caveat, based on the incident reports we received. We did require all of the providers to submit an incident report at exposure if there was a positive test or a death where COVID was the reported cause. So out of the around 26,000 people that we serve, we had 1.86% that were exposed to COVID that did not have a subsequent positive test result. We had an average of 2.49 that tested positive for COVID. The exposures, if there was not a positive after that, we didn't include these where there were positive. We didn't include the exposures in there, so that's why that number looks a little bit funny. So, but 2.49% and an average of 0.27 deaths where COVID was the reported cause. So we had very few deaths. We actually had very few hospitalizations. I don't have that stat on here, but our providers did a very good job and our families of protecting our individuals, I think, from COVID and really allowing them to still be supported in the community but not be at as much risk of receiving or being exposed to the virus. So beyond Appendix K, what we want to keep, so I've mentioned telehealth. That's something that we want to expand in our HCB waiver, which we just completed the renewal, and it's with CMS for approval right now. We have already added telehealth services into that will go on beyond Appendix K. The expansion of home-delivered meals, as well as the change of moving it from just a hot meal to allowing the individual to have a choice of whether they want a hot delivered meal or whether they would rather it be a chilled meal or frozen meals that they would want to receive over a period of time that would allow them more flexibility. And then again, the allowing services in the acute hospital settings when necessary to support the participant if the hospital is not able to meet their needs. So our next steps, as I've mentioned, we some of those flexibilities we've already written into the HCB waiver renewal. We're going to continue monitoring utilization to see what that tells us, because it tells me a lot as far as where do we need to go with services, what are we seeing that's being used, what are we seeing that's not being used, what's the reason for that, as well as with any change, we have to evaluate the applications we have with CMS as well as the regulations to make the changes that will support those after Appendix K is no longer in effect. So we'll let Claudia now talk about what they did to support, in particular, the SCL and Michelle P. population during, and continue to support while we're in the pandemic.
Thanks, Pam. So, as Pam said, we in the Division of Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities, we administer the 2 waivers that are for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and that's the SCL and the Michelle P. waiver. So one thing that we noticed, we so appreciated the flexibilities that Appendix K allowed for the providers, which in turn made huge differences for the participants in those waivers. And one of the biggest flexibility that I think made a huge difference in people's lives was the increased residential rate. So it was just the staffed residences, and those are the homes that have up 1 to 3 people in a home with round-the-clock staff. And allowing those providers to bill the 150% rate while the people stayed home allowed the people to be so creative and truly give the 1 to 3 participants a choice in their life and real person-centered planning. So what we saw was, and what we heard too from providers, is that we got to know people. They didn't wake up in the morning and go to day training and come home and eat and go to bed. So we spent all day with them because we had the resources to have those staff at home during the day. So we learned people loved gardening, and we learned that people loved to cook, and people loved animals, or took up a musical instrument, or started an exercise program. And we've heard so many success stories of people that lost 50 pounds and are still working out and walking. So it was all the kind of things that, well, I would hope I had done during COVID, but good plans. But people were really able to live their life and do what they wanted to do and have choice. And I think the big part of that is the current model we have is built on a staffed residence with 3 people and staff. But during the day, people go somewhere. They either go to day training or they go to work. And during COVID, everybody stayed home. So that flexibility really allowed providers and people to explore themselves and their interests. And I don't know the feasibility of that rate continuing, but I think looking at rates and considering whether or not the residential rate is adequate for any of the waivers, I think would be a very important thing going forward, to do a real cost study of those. Another thing that we saw that it allowed a lot of creativity, and Pam mentioned this, the virtual day training. It wasn't just putting a Zoom into the day training setting and working with people. We saw providers do virtual talent shows, and they did virtual read-alongs and sing-alongs, and they had parties, and they did virtual birthday parties and Christmas parties, and they explored all kinds of virtual trips. I mean, they could go on a virtual trip to a museum or a virtual trip to an aquarium, and it's like it brought out the creativity in everyone, and it was really refreshing to see that. People got to choose if they wanted to, like providers, most of them had schedules, at this time on this day, this is what we're going to do, and people could say, ooh, I want to do that one, or I want to pick that one, but I don't want to do it all day. So, and I'm really happy that that's something that Medicaid's going to allow to continue in the waivers, is to have that option, where some people want to go back to day training and they really missed that interaction, but there's people that don't. They want to get up at 8 or 9 instead of 6, and they want to do things during the day as they feel like it. They might want to garden. They might be 60 or older, and they just don't want to go so much during the day. They want to be able to be at home. So those are, I think, the biggest things we saw as the flexibilities that really allowed people to sit back and get to know themselves, and providers to get to know the people they support. And it was a lot of good that came out of a really bad situation with COVID, and I'm really hopeful that some of that can continue, and Pam's already said some of it can. Waiver services being allowed in a hospital setting is huge. I mean, that's something that CMS didn't used to allow, and they do now, so we're thankful for that, because typically people in these waivers that go in the hospital, they need somebody there to support them. The hospital doesn't provide enough staff. Well, we know that staff shortages everywhere, and they're just not able to support people that way. So COVID was terrible, or is terrible, but we've seen a lot of good come out of it, and we've seen an amazing amount of creativity and growth in both the providers and the people supported.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. I have a couple of questions I'll start out with. I'm assuming that our committee members will have a couple of questions. So with the with kind of the flexibilities in the Appendix K, exactly how much did Medicaid spend? What was the increased cost of allowing those flexibilities?
I don't have the total cost with me, but I can get that and give to you. I have it. I just don't have the numbers with me, but I can get that and provide it to you. What
Okay,
the difference
great.
was. Mhm.
I would like that, and if staff could follow up, that'd be great. I guess the second question I'd have as a result of what the costs were with these flexibilities is it seems to be that the testimony is that this was a very good thing for the waiver community. Did you notice anything, at least with these 8 that have been outlined? Both of you all testified that that you have seen benefits with regard to these flexibilities. How come we've only added 3 of the 8 is in the new plan to be approved by CMS?
Part of it is based on the waivers. So right now, the only 2 waivers that were up for renewal were Model 2 and HCB. So it's not that we aren't going to add them. It is as we're looking at waiver redesign as a whole, I believe we will be submitting new renewals for all of the other waivers that will include these options prior to Appendix K expiring. It's something I think as we move forward with waiver redesign and the recommendations of this committee that we will add to those. It's just that because we don't have them open right now and we have an approval through Appendix K that we have not started that. But I fully anticipate that we will add those flexibilities into the other waivers as well.
Okay, and then before I move on, let me ask you, you've testified what's worked great. Were there any things that didn't work so well that we need to be mindful of?
I'll tell you, honestly, one thing, and actually Ms. Habern's testimony really highlighted this, is that we've learned that that some of our case managers need more training. And need to understand more about the services, as well as that we need to be able to get back, either it be virtually or be able to go back out into our town halls and make sure that our individuals and the families that support them understand what's available and understand what types of services. So I think it's highlighted a lot of what was not just about the lack of understanding about building a comprehensive person-centered plan of care.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear you say that, because that was what I've been thinking about, is that it took Shirley here to testify, and this certainly isn't her first rodeo. She's been doing it for her son's entire life, and then for her not to know what she was able to access or not access seems to me to be a huge disconnect between Medicaid and their clients. And we really can't have that happen ever. We need to make sure that our case management is as buttoned up, because our families really deserve it. So I'm really happy to hear you say that. We have Senator Carroll next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think with the case management aspect, you have to remember that there is a huge turnover in case managers in our part of the state, and I'm sure that's consistent throughout the entire Commonwealth. So it's very difficult to get consistency, and it seems that about the time that these case managers won't really learn the waivers and learn what services are available, they move on somewhere else. So that's another issue into itself. The question I have is, Pam, thank you all both for testifying today, and appreciate the information. You mentioned with the family home providers about respite care being available through Appendix K. Mm-hmm. And my question is, why do we not require respite with FHP? Why is there not a minimum number of hours that a provider has to provide for that individual to give the FHP provider a break? I know some agencies do give respite hours and some don't. Why do we not require that as a state in the best interests of the individuals being served?
I think that's something else that we have learned is that maybe the way, I think that model, the way that it has been looked at or traditionally viewed is, you're incorporating someone into your home, they're part of your family. But just like, any other family, it's important to be an effective caregiver. You need time to be able to do things for yourself. Sometimes you need time to just be able to go to the grocery or just to be able to take a nap. So, respite I think is foundational regardless of who, whether it's a family member or whether you're in an FHP. So I think that's something we need to look at going forward, especially as we look at the service menu and look at, is there a model with those adult foster home and family home providers that we can provide, that respite is an option for them as well. And right now, because of the way, each individual provider contracts with the FHPs, and so there's not really a model across the board of this is what we expect that you have to, that you would do. So that is something I think we can look at going forward too, is that, at a base, all of your contracts with your FHPs have to allow for these things.
I think that would be a great move. And what we see in our area is that sometimes there are homes where they will go wherever they can get the highest rate. And then, they do not provide respite for the individual. And I think that quality of life for that individual suffers because of that. And then there are facilities that may not pay as much for the in-home provider, but they provide respite hours with that out of concern for the individual. So I think that is something we really are missing as far as quality of life for the individuals and for the families, like you just mentioned. So I appreciate your statements on that, and I hope we can make some changes in that area. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next is Senator Meredith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 questions, if I'm right. The first, Zoom meetings are something that's come out of this COVID, and I'm not really a big advocate for those because we miss so much. Supposedly 93% of communication is nonverbal, and when you're talking about the 150% rate for residential rates, some people in the audience are going like this, and you don't get to see that on Zoom. So that certainly indicates that's very important to folks, and as well as some kind of increase in rates. I'm just curious, the 150, that's probably just arbitrarily set because we knew we had to do something. If the 150% is adequate, is that what the new rate should look like, or should it be more? Should it be less?
I think to understand what the rate truly should look like, then there really needs to be an understanding of everything that's going into being a residential provider or any service provider. So I think that there really needs to be that look into that and the gathering of all of that information. The 150% really was based on conversations we had with other states and that we had with some of the providers, and based on what CMS would, the allowances that we had with Appendix K. So I don't know that is the right amount. I think that, we also need to look at having tiered levels that, you may have someone that needs a lot of support that would, you would reimburse at a higher rate, and somebody that, is able to have hours of independent time and really is able to do a lot for themselves and is more just supervision, that they would be at a lower rate. So I think it's not really an answer that you have one rate for residential. I think it's looking at in total what does it cost, and then looking at the people that we're supporting and making sure that the ones that need the most support that actually are able to get it, and then it's not that cookie cutter, okay, it's residential, it's rate 1, 2, 3.
Well, that certainly is consistent with the discussion we've had already about the flexibility of this, and I certainly support it, and it's evident that you folks do as well. Senator Adams made reference to the 8 flexibilities that you've identified, and you've picked 3, and I think those are the appropriate given the current circumstances. But I'm just curious, beyond that, beyond the 8, in a perfect world, what other flexibilities would you like to see with this program that maybe we haven't identified yet?
So, perfect world, what I would like to see us get to is what some other states that have very strong independent assessments that get down to individual budgeting, to where you actually look at the assessment and you do a budget for care based on what that individual needs, not based on the program that they're in, not based on what the rates are for that program, but that it truly is individualized and is truly person-centered, is where I hope that at some point that we will get to. I think that we have a few steps to get there, but I hope ultimately that would be my ultimate goal.
And I think that's an admirable goal, because again, given that we've all kind of acknowledged today that flexibility in the program is very important. We don't want to do cookie cutter any longer.
Correct.
That we need to evolve in that direction. So, Madam Chair, maybe that's something we need to give priority to in terms of the final report from this task force. But I appreciate your answer on that. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator, and I agree with you. Next up is Representative Stevenson.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm new to this area, and if this question would be better answered offline, I'd be willing to call. But the part I don't understand is in Ms. Haberman's testimony, she said her son requires 24/7 care, was categorized with someone that needed a little care. So the categorization that would put two different types of patients together and receive the same amount of funding is what I'm curious about.
So I think part of that is the lack of education with some of the case managers, or the lack of understanding, or as Senator Carroll referenced, the turnover rate is very high. So, training for those individuals, as well as, I admire Ms. Haberman for advocating for her son. I wish we could see more and more of those advocates and those people that speak out and say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. So, I wish I could say that it wasn't happening. Obviously it is, but we do have a lot where it is you're on SCL, this is the plan I'm going to take off the shelf, and this is what I'm going to give you. So I think, unfortunately, it is a reality of what we're seeing in our waivers now, but it's something that we want to address immediately, and that we want to continue to push that person-centered planning and the holistic view of the person. So, a lot of times we see, okay, these are the waiver services I can offer you. Well, as I'm listening to her speak, I'm going through my mind and I'm thinking, okay, I can think of at least 2 different state plan services that could also benefit, that would also benefit your son. So really learning how do we build that support around our providers, our individuals. And Senator Meredith, I agree with you, in person is just better. There's so much more that you can see in person, and I am excited for the day that they'll let us go back out and start doing those.
So just so I can thank you for that answer. I just want to be sure I understand that when you're on a waiver, everybody's on one waiver. It's not like you're on a little waiver or big, there's no distinction. Everybody's just on a waiver.
There are 6 different waivers.
Okay, got it. That's what I was.
So each one has their own service menu. So we have 2 that serve intellectual and developmental disabilities, which is Michelle P. and SCL. Michelle P. Is limited to 40 hours a week of services. That's the way the waiver is written. It does not have a residential component, whereas SCL has a residential component. The 2 brain injury waivers both have residential components. HCB is the waiver for physical disabilities and our aged individuals. It does not have a residential component, as well as Model 2 is for our individuals that are either ventilator dependent or on an active weaning program, that does not also have residential.
And if I could just respond to your first question, I think one of Ms. Haberman's issues is that there are some parents who don't want their child to go into a staffed residence or a family home provider, so they choose not to get residential services. But in her case, her son still needs that 24/7. And it's difficult the way the waivers are structured right now to get 24/7 service. She mentioned the 16 hours. So the SCL waiver, it's written in there that you can only get 16 hours of active services to allow the other 8 hours for sleep. And it doesn't take into account those people that still need somebody there for sleep. So I think that's something we could look at as well.
Thank you.
Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pam, when you mentioned with the Michelle P. waiver, the number of adolescents that are on that particular waiver, as we move forward, what do you anticipate that aspect of Michelle P. looking like? Will there be, as you said, normally with kids, there are more natural supports. Will there be different parameters that you would anticipate for youth that are on the waiver, perhaps stricter compliance as far as the need for respite and services that can often be provided through natural supports?
I think we need to look at that. One of the things through in our enhanced FMAP plan that we sent to CMS is to do a feasibility study to look at even a waiver that centers around children. So maybe that it would be, instead of having, because Michelle P. is over 70% children, so instead of having a waiver that was intended for adults serve that many children, do we look at is there a way we could serve them better in a different way? They also children, because of EPSDT, they have some additional flexibilities, because anything that is medically necessary for a child under the age of 21, they can get that through EPSDT. As well. So I think we really need to look at currently how they're configured and the service options and what is the best way to support those individuals, because there are many children that need those services or need some type of services, but I think maybe we fit them into a box because that's what we had. So as we go forward and really push the person-centeredness and looking at individuals, that we'll be able to address that, I hope.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'll just end. I have one question. I know we talked about this at the last committee meeting where we talked about how there might be a need for a new model. And so we talk about waiver redesign, but we talk about it in these really esoteric terms. And so I kind of would like to pin somebody down when we talk about redesign. What does that mean? What can we expect to see from the cabinet? When can we expect to see that from the cabinet? How can we participate in that redesign? And if we need a new model, how do we do that new model and talk about it during this interim? Because I'm kind of frustrated that we say, well, we're talking about this in the redesign, and then we're thinking about this in the redesign. What are we going to see? When are we going to see it? How can we participate? What can we get down on a piece of paper?
So that's a lot. And I know we still have some other people to testify. If you would like to address that at the next meeting, I'm more than happy to bring back what we have included in our FMAP to do with that enhanced money, because I think part of it is going to start with that. But to lay out what the plan is that we would like to see and what this task force can help, or how your all's ideas will feed into that, and how we can together move forward, so that it's not just, because you're right, we are talking about it in kind of this nebulous term that it's waiver redesign. And we've been talking about it, and it's time to put boots on the ground and start making action and moving forward with it. So I would be more than happy if you want to do that for the next committee meeting. I can bring that back.
Yeah, because one of the things, and I'll just follow up, is we talked about in the last committee meeting, I think Senator Meredith asked for that overall cost of what the cabinet needs, and then what does that breakdown look like? And I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's gone out to the task force members, but we're still waiting for that number that the cabinet says that they need, and then what they need it for.
I will follow up on that. I will.
Am I correct, Senator Meredith, in that?
I do not believe it has been sent, and I think part of it was it, and I will fully take blame for that. The short turnaround time we had on submitting the FMAP our spending plan for that, I delayed some of that. So I will make sure that you all have that as well before the next committee meeting.
Madam Chair, I think the number was thrown out, but it was very broad. I think something like 43 million, but we really didn't have the specifics as to
It didn't
what that
have the
would go
service, the
to
breakouts
from.
into what that would go to.
So yes, we would appreciate that. And,
Okay.
But to your point, I think as this conversation has evolved, and we talked to flexibility of the program, that may be the ultimate outcome of this is flexibility in trying to make this thing more specific to the recipients rather than just, as you said, one size fits all. In any way we could expedite that, maybe a charge of this committee. Thank you.
I think a big part of that, and Pam mentioned this, is that there needs to be an assessment, a true needs assessment to determine that flexibility and the individualized needs of each person. I know SCL has an assessment and HCB has an assessment. Michelle P., I don't know what, brain injury has one as well. And Michelle P. serves 10,000 people. And there really isn't a true needs assessment. And I think in order to make it individualized, that's going to have to happen. And I don't know the cost of making that happen.
That's one of the things that we have added in with the FMAP too, is to get a validated true assessment tool that would allow us to do that. Because right now, out of 6 different waivers, I believe we have 4 different assessments, and only one of them is a validated assessment. The others are kind of a homegrown type tool that has evolved over time. So that will be one of the essential kind of the founding pieces of going forward, because you have to know what the individuals need to be able to know how to support them.
So to that end, and to Senator Adams' point, 6 different waivers. Can you envision where it's a single waiver, but we're given the flexibility within that waiver to meet the needs of the recipients?
That is one model. I know before I came to the state, it was discussed. I'm not sure exactly where it stopped, but that is something that is an option that we could look at, that whether you have one waiver that has just a large menu of services, and then based on who the individual is and what needs they have, what services they would receive.
And I assume that the case managers take on a broadened role under that model, that they're given that authority to do those assessments, make those recommendations. Is that fair?
We would ideally, because SCL and HCB have independent assessors, we found that you get a more valid picture of the individual when you have somebody that is not going to potentially be one of the service providers that is doing the assessment. So you would have an independent group that would do those assessments with input from their case managers and their service providers and their families. And then that would be used. So I think that is the model, that because the SIS assessors, we have its individual staff that do that as well, but there's respondents that know, it's 3 respondents, Claudia, is that correct? That have been involved in that individual's care, so they know them. So I think that's an important piece of an independent assessment, is that you don't lose the people that have supported them and know them. And it's also for people to learn it's okay to ask for help. We'll have a lot of times where people say, no, I can do it. But I can do it means I'm staggering down the hallway, holding onto the walls, and maybe falling before I get there. And so it's really taking away that fear of saying, I need help. And it's okay to ask for help. So it's kind of taking down some of those barriers.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and I do appreciate your all's testimony. I think we can all hold hands and figure this out together, and I appreciate your all's time today.
Thank you.
Next up, last but not least, we have the impact of regulatory burdens on the delivery of waiver services. Looks like we have 4 folks that are going to testify. I don't know if you all want to all come up at the same time. That would probably save some time, if at least some transitional time. We only have 2 in. Oh, okay, 2 in person and 2 virtual. Oh. They're just these 2 together. Oh, those 2 together. So it's 2 and 2. That's what they just explained to me. So why don't we do Tracy? 2 and 2. 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 2 Tracy and Kelly, and then we do Jane and Malia. Okay. All right. I've got it figured out, I think. So please introduce yourself for the record and then go ahead and. Is your microphone on? Okay. Now go.
My name is Tracy Butterfield, and I work for Life Skills in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So I have worked for the company for 12 years. I'm also a parent of an adult child with autism that's on the spectrum. The program that I manage has about 80 people that serve residentially, and we have about 600 people that get supports through PDS. So I really appreciate the opportunity that you all have this committee and giving me an opportunity to speak today. So I also wanted to thank the cabinet for the ARPA spending plan. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty amazing, and how they're looking at trying to get some money for DSP wage funding and crisis services. So I'm really thankful that there is an outlook to help us. During COVID, we've been bare bones with staff. We had several individuals die at our agency with COVID. We had several staff that are very sick, and we're in pretty extreme crisis. Where we are right now is our workforce is pretty shattered. We have a lot of people that we're having a hard time recruiting coming in to support people because of so many people not wanting to come back to work, and the wages not being commensurate with places like McDonald's, Burger King, Walmart paying more. So there's a lot of responsibilities that goes onto the role of a caregiver on top of some of the wages. So that's one of the things that we're facing. And also the people that actually stayed, we're really seeing some caregiver exhaustion and fatigue. And I can tell you, for like my staff in our group home, we're almost seeing some trauma responses from going through every day trying to keep people from getting COVID, trying to get people from getting sick. And they had some individuals that died during that period, that just doing the maintain day to day has been really hard. So I'm very thankful that you guys are looking at the impact of the burden of the regulations, because I think those are some of the things that make it cumbersome as we're out doing the work to get the work done and focus on our clients and focus on the people that we support instead of some of the regulatory burdens. One of the things you were talking about is some of the case managers weren't starting services, and I was thinking about that a few minutes ago, is because of some of the regulatory burden, it's very confusing sometimes in how a rule, we really need straightforward regulations, and sometimes things change by letter or by memo or by word of mouth, and agencies are worried or fearful about making changes that could come back and have really costly recoupments. So in the end, you have people that are kind of pausing to do some of the services that they might provide, such as something that mom might have wanted to know about. Case managers may not be offering those out as an option because they're not sure with all the changes in the regulation. So because sometimes of all of the confusion in so many different directions, that causes a pause. We've had providers that have talked about being fear of the letter of the law, that if they don't follow it exactly as written, then there might be a hefty recoupment. So an example I can give you on my end is I had a provider that provided daily supports every day, and on her note she wrote 12 mid. And instead of it saying 12 a.m., 12 p.m., she wrote 12 mid. We serve the person every day for that month, but we're recouped for that month of service. So something as small as how that was caught caused an administrative burden on our end. So there has been times that as an agency and even as a provider that my heart is to want to support someone. I don't know that we can take on that extra cost or burden, so we haven't. The program structure, the way that it is, a lot of what's been talked about today is the way that the rates are designed to support a 3-to-1, pretty much a 3-to-1 situation. At Life Skills, we have a large population of people that are aging, and as they age and we're trying to keep some of them out of a facility, there's times where I have to make gut-wrenching hard decisions to go ahead and have them do something else because I can't continue the burden on the staff or the participant. And so unfortunately, we've had people that have had to go to a higher level nursing home care because we couldn't at the rate have an additional staff hired, so that made that more difficult. And so we couldn't keep the person there. I had a young woman that I've actually, I won't give you my age, but I worked with since I was 18, so it's been a minute, or a long minute. As her needs changed, she was in a group home with 8 people, and as her needs changed, she fell, she broke some bones. We had to have a 24-hour awake staff. So to have a 24-hour awake staff with her, in addition to the staff in the group home, that was in a whole administrative burden that wasn't covered. And so in order to keep her with us, that's a level of support that she needed to be with us. So unfortunately, as much as we tried, it ended up that she had to seek a different level of care. And so I can tell you, with our agency alone, my heart is really to continue to provide to medically fragile folks. I feel like that we're at a state that when they're their most vulnerable is when they need a medical advocate, when they have somebody that understands that it's not a part of their disability, it's also part of something changing in their health. But if they have a more unique structured need and we can't get that level of funding, it makes it hard to keep them in the programs. We have a substantial amount of time right now. I can tell you for our agency, we want to comply with the regulations. We want to be in full compliance. We want to follow the law. We want to make sure that our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed. So there's times that maybe we won't do things because the regulations are cumbersome, and we want to make sure that we're not doing something that could result in a recoupment. For instance, there's a change in the structure. Prior to the way the regs were written, we had, if there was somebody that they referred to me and asked me, Tracy, will you look at this person? I might. The way the regs are written now, you admit them to your program, and if you don't admit them, if their needs are too complex, medically or behavioral, and you can't support them, you have to keep them until another person accepts them. So that causes hesitancy to say, well, maybe I might not be able to meet their needs. I might, if I had a chance to let them see, come stay with us a month, do some respite trials, I might be able to support them. But I'm not willing to take that administrative burden on for the agency for somebody that we may have to support for 3 years, 6 years, 10 years, and not be able to do it. So I think that's an administrative change that has really made it difficult for some participants out there that could use that care that can't get actually into programs. Appendix K really did help us. The increased residential rate has really allowed for people to stay in their homes and thrive. I will say that's not covered our adult foster care, and I really hope that we look at that. Some of our adult foster care were completely shut down during COVID. They couldn't have visitors come in, they couldn't see their family, they couldn't have their adult children come in, and people were at home 24/7. And as we look at like the variants coming back right now, I've had people that say, no, thank you, I'm not interested in that work if that means I might have that level of stringency. But Appendix K, I think, opened the doors in a way that the disability field has needed for decades. You know, telehealth, to actually be able to get into somebody's room when they're having a hard time, to be able to go to therapy, see your doctor, to be able to reach out, because we have people that it's not so easy. The woman that testified with her son, just getting to the hospital, to the doctor, sometimes is cumbersome. And I'll also say that being able to have somebody to go into the hospital and be an advocate during COVID is like air. It's really made a difference. A lot of times medical professionals will see our individuals and say, oh, that's a part of their disability. And so unless you can explain what the difference is and have somebody that knows them their best, you miss things. And so I'm really hopeful that that helps. The delayed background checks, sometimes it takes a month to 6 weeks to get somebody in. And when you don't have somebody today, you have nobody in the home, there's nobody sitting there to work, support your person, people have strangers in their home. So that delayed background check made a difference. It really has helped us to get people in the door, to provide training. And so we're very thankful for that. Again, some of the things, when you looked at burden, I think changes shouldn't happen unless it's clear across waivers. I don't have time to go back and see, was it a memo, an email, a regulation? I'm seasoned. I've been doing this work for a long time. A new person, it's very confusing, and they don't want to take on the cost of getting charges for that or fined for that. I think one of the things that we talked about is shared documents. There's things that's like, if you have a finite resource, finite things that you can do, how can we cut out the fluff? You know, if we're all sharing, we have something called MWMA. If we all have to have a physical, then why do we all have to have it? There's certain documents that we all share. Instead of spending time, administrative time, that we have to audit records, can those things just be in the record of that the provider uses, the things that everybody uses? I think the service definitions, as they've tried to explain to you today, what's this waiver, what's that waiver, how is this defined? Respite in one waiver may look vastly different, and the rates may be different between. So for a case manager, when those things are changing on paper and through memo and through conversation, it's even more complicated. The other thing is that for PDS employees, they are the employer. They're the person that's the employer of the individuals. But it's the agencies, the case management agency, the fiscal management agencies that bear the responsibility. So if there's a background check that's not done, there's something that's not done, the agency is the person that gets the cost of that, which can be an extreme monumental charge that you're receiving. We would really like to see that the burden of doing PDS, if you're the PDS employer, that the employer be whoever that is, and not the companies charged for that, because it just makes it more complicated. I think it's really important that we look at our workforce and that we know that our workforce is in crisis, because we can have every conversation every day, but if we don't have people to do the work and we don't have boots on the ground, as you'll say, that understand how to do the work, we can't get to the other stuff. That's just idealistic if we can't get to people having the care they need because we can't get people in the door. We're extremely thankful that you all are here and you're listening and thinking about how can we pull things together. An example is there's a waiver, it's called E1399s. It's where you're requesting glasses, diapers, different type of health. Some of them you have to do 3 estimates. If you know that you're going to have to do 3 estimates, we've sent estimates in and they said, well, use the Walmart vendor. Well, if you knew to use the Walmart vendor to begin with, why didn't you just tell us that, instead of we've now went through 4 hours for one person for 1 pair of glasses, when we just know they need a pair of glasses. And I'm not trying to sound trite, but I'm worried about if I have somebody at the ER that we're worrying about, are they gonna make it or not, and I'm trying to make sure this person has glasses, and I only have a finite amount of resources. When I've talked to my peers across the state, case management agencies, DTs, all of us are saying we want to do the work. We want to get back to seeing people happy, healthy, engaged with true person-centered supports, which the waiver's doing. You guys, they're starting to do it. Appendix K is changing it. But I just hope that we continue to get to the next level with the things that we're doing.
Thank you. Want to introduce yourself for the record?
Yes, my name is Kelly Kendall. I'm the Executive Director for Cedar Lake Residences. I have the honor of supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I so sincerely appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and share some stories of the individuals that I get to spend time with. The privilege of supporting this underserved population in Louisville and the outlying areas comes with its share of challenges and joys. We have the opportunity to support people in a way that truly changes their lives. The Cabinet supports providers the best that they can within the confines of the system that exists. Still, the barriers of integration and the realities of what person-centered services look like in practice are often overlooked. I want to share a story of with you all of an individual I support named Brian. And we have had the pleasure of supporting Brian at Cedar Lake for 26 years. I want to let that resonate, 26 years. His needs have changed throughout the time that we have supported him dramatically. At one point, he may have fit in a box that allowed for the waiver to meet his needs, but this has not been the case for many years now. Estimates suggest that 50% or more of people with Down syndrome will develop dementia related to Alzheimer's in their lifetime. Dementia and Alzheimer's look different for each person that it impacts. For Brian, this looks like psychosis coupled with hallucinations, physical aggression, anorexia, and property destruction. Supporting Brian within the confines of the Kentucky waiver system has been extremely challenging. The waiver reimburses providers for one staff person supporting 3 people with varying degrees of disabilities living together in one home. This is the home where Brian lives. I'd like you to picture the real life scenario from the perspective of the direct support professional and the agency support staff. Imagine you're attempting to provide care for one individual that requires all of your attention, focus, and resources. You are being attacked physically, and you are emotionally drained. You beg for help from your leaders who are desperate to find more support for you and the other individuals living in that home. The administration turns to the waiver for help. The solution is to apply for something called the exceptional rate so that you can afford the additional staffing. At this point, leadership works to submit documentation that proves the need for more assistance, attempting to show that one person alone cannot provide the intensive supports that are needed. Incident reports, daily notes, summaries, correspondence with the team, behavior tracking are all gathered for the request for help. It is the burden of the agency to demonstrate their eligibility and need for exceptional supports while they are in crisis. If the provider is approved for the service, it is at a portion of the price it costs to actually provide it. Overtime costs and staff wages aren't rightfully considered when the rate is determined, and providers are without other options, so we move forward. Just when that direct support professional feels they may be able to take a breath, the increased documentation requirements are introduced. You're exhausted emotionally and physically. Maybe you forget to write a note, or you don't write it the way that you're asked to. At that point, that piece of documentation that you're required to receive the financial benefit, you have to provide the documentation. Now the agency that you work so hard for is being held financially accountable for not writing a simple note while you were doing your best to get through the day after working alone for 16 hours. The response that we get is one of bureaucracy and strict compliance, not compassion. All the while, Brian is still getting sicker with no level of intermediate medical support or assistance available. The other individuals in the home have now started to display challenging behaviors because their needs are not getting met. This cycle continues. This is simply the perspective of the DSP and the provider. Now look at this from the perspective of the other people living in the home. Brian's friends, his roommates. Again, Brian's been with us for 26 years. The staff person they rely on is completely occupied providing support to your friend who is struggling. You're scared. He's screaming. He's breaking things. You're out of options. Perhaps you want to leave and go to the park, spend some time away from a contentious environment. Your staff person can't take you because your roommate, Brian, refuses to leave. You don't qualify for other integration services or opportunities because the waiver restricts the way your own community can embrace you. Services are written in a way that punish you for your level of disability. You're particularly susceptible to abuse or exploitation. Maybe you need assistance to move independently. The waiver says you can't receive community access because you could never be supported without a staff person with you. Maybe your team believes in you, and they believe you can form successful relationships in the community. You're approved for community access and work to build those supportive relationships in the community. Months later, a person who has never met you reads the documentation surrounding the opportunities you've had in the community. It's determined you couldn't possibly be integrated into the community because of your level of disability and need. Or it's determined that the relationships you have forged don't fit the regulation. The provider is recouped, and you're no longer able to enter the community. The happiness or benefit to the individual is never discussed because the waiver doesn't account for this important consideration. The spirit of the waiver is to allow our folks into the community without limitations and without barriers. Who are we to determine what is and isn't a meaningful interaction for the people that we're supporting? Yet this is what happens every day for people with complex needs who are served by the waiver system. This limits the individual to spending time in their home, which has become contentious and frightening. Brian needs a level of support that we're unable to provide as the waiver currently stands. Unfortunately, Brian's story is not unique. Statistically, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities will need additional care in their lifetime that the waiver is currently unable to provide. We are fortunate to have the opportunity to provide additional levels of support through the enhanced HCBS spending plan. Additional staffing supports with the introduction of other database disciplines can positively impact the lives of the individuals we support. Using this funding to further support waiver recipients by creating access to active treatment can improve quality of life and keep people in their communities and homes longer. People in the IDD community benefit from a variety of services. It's truly a team effort that keeps individuals we support safe, independent, and happy. The emergency implementation of Appendix K during COVID-19 greatly impacted the way people access their supports and the community. This type of flexibility is a wonderful example of the opportunities we have to provide real person-centered services. People in the community can attend day training from the comfort of their own homes to help build their confidence to then attend those in-person services down the road. Accessing technology has empowered the IDD community significantly. Using technology to receive waiver services meets the needs of individuals in a more person-centered way. It also helps people better prepare for real-life experiences in their communities. Individuals living independently in the community were able to receive the support needed to be successful through less intrusive means. Instead of a staff person entering the personal residence to review medication, they're able to speak with a staff person through video chat to achieve the same safety and objective. This allows providers to keep more people safe and confident in their communities. The indirect benefits have also been astounding for the individuals we support. They're gaining confidence with technology, in turn creating more employment opportunities and ways to connect safely in their communities. Providers are incredibly thankful for this support and look forward to the long-standing implementation of these person-centered flexibilities. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to advocate on behalf of the direct support professionals that are significantly impacted by our ongoing staffing crises. We were facing a staffing crisis well before COVID-19. The crisis we face today is unlike anything we have ever experienced. To date, Cedar Lake Residences has 27 vacant direct support professional roles that we cannot fill. Those vacancies leave our staff severely overworked, at times moving into the homes of the individuals that we support due to emergencies. Workers in other industries that require far less training and responsibility are making comparable wages while being incentives we cannot compete with. An increase to the waiver reimbursement would allow for us to provide competitive wages that would aid in the recruitment and retention of these critical roles, directly impacting the people that we support. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. It is compassion, love, and dedication to the people we support that brings us all here, and we thank you for listening to our stories. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have, and I want to invite you. Come spend time with us at Cedar Lake. We're a lot of fun, so you can come join the party.
Come join the party.
Yes.
I think right now we're going to bring up Jane and Malia, and if they could provide some testimony, and then we will do a collective Q&A after they are done. Yep. So just introduce yourself for the record, and please proceed. And then when you all are done, take questions for all the presenters.
Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Jane Stahl. I'm the Executive Director of Nurse Restorative Kentucky. I am a registered nurse and a nursing home administrator. and I've been with NeuroRestorative for 9 years. And joining me today is Malia Purdue, the Program Director at Paducah.
Good morning, afternoon. Thank you all for allowing us to be here. I'm really excited about this opportunity and very passionate about this, and echo so many of the things that I've heard here today. So this is an exciting moment. My program in Paducah is a 48-bed program. We have 17 homes in Paducah. I have 3 residential clients in each home, and we do have very medically complex, behaviorally challenged individuals that live there, all of them with traumatic brain injuries, 18 and above. And so we do have some stories to share with you, some successes and some barriers that just like the others, just to make you aware of what's going on and how it's impacted us. And I've been serving 21 years in social work and had the opportunity to work in these last 20 years with some of Kentucky's most vulnerable individuals, and never have I come across the barriers that we have come across in this last year plus, primarily due to COVID and then some additional reasons. So I'll let Jane speak a little bit and kind of jump back into some of what those barriers might be.
First, on behalf of NeuroRestorative Kentucky and our employees and the individuals we serve, we would like to thank Co-Chair Senator Julie Warkey Adams and Representative Stephen Riley, along with all of the members of the task force, for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for your service and attention in addressing the 1915C waivers and being champions of the waivers. It's certainly not an easy issue to tackle, as each of the 6 waivers are important as they serve Kentucky's most vulnerable. While I'm here to speak as an ABI provider, on a personal note, I am a proud mother of an adult daughter, 35, that is on the Michelle P. waiver. I look at the waivers through a unique lens as a provider and as a parent. For background, NeuroRestorative has been around for 40 years, and we are the leading provider of rehabilitation services for people of all ages with brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, and medically complex injuries. We provide waiver services in Kentucky for over 15 years, and we now have 6 programs across the state of Kentucky. We hope to use our national and in-state experience to provide a valuable input to this task force. We have been asked today to speak on the regulatory burdens and the delivery of services in Appendix K. So first of all, I'd like to emphasize points already made regarding the focus on the individual and not the paper. It's highly important with the ABI waivers, as you heard last month, that the ABI waivers are unique in the sense that they are rehabilitative waivers. As people move through the phases of their individually tailored programs, we assess and measure physical and functional abilities that affect their ability to live as independently and as safely as possible in their day-to-day basis. Clinical experts establish individual rehabilitative goals, and we carefully measure the progress as individuals move through their neurological rehabilitation programs and treatment of complex injuries. Further, time is imperative when providing services to the individual, as the injury is unique. ABI does not have a one-size-fits-all approach, as each individual journey is unique.
And just as a segue, that's a great segue into just speaking about an individual that we worked with, because we do know that everybody's path is different. All of our paths are different. None of us have the same path. But you can imagine if you've suffered a traumatic brain injury and you've had goals and hopes and aspirations, that path suddenly, for not only for you, has changed, but for your family as well. So many individuals that come in to see us, not only is their life greatly impacted, but their families as well. One individual that we had, and I just want to touch on this so you can see how our process works in Paducah and across our other neurorestorative programs. We are unique in the fact that we are a waiver that we can see someone rehabilitate and move back into the community and be successful. Maybe not to the point to where they were prior to their brain injury, but hopefully as closely as possible. That is the hope for most, but unfortunately for the majority, they do live with us residentially for a very long period of time. One of our participants, I'll call him Troy, came in, and unfortunately his accident stemmed from a substance issue. We see many of our clients that come in from those types of substance issues, mental health history, failed suicide attempts, cardiac issues, suffering strokes, things that are highly preventable with the right type of care, health care, and prevention. They're not getting that, and they move into something very unfortunate as maybe a gunshot wound, which is what Troy sustained. Troy lived with us for 9 years. We have a very unique setting that we call the cul-de-sac setting. We have 10 homes within this neighborhood. It looks exactly like a neighborhood. If you were to drive into my cul-de-sac, you would see 10 homes and it would look like a neighborhood. But within those 10 homes, we have residential clients that live in each of the homes. And I also have a nursing staff that we'll talk about in just a second that are also stationed in that cul-de-sac along with my residential managers. So we've got some folks there that are on site that can help. Troy moved through that process with the help of his clinical team with some very intense therapy, moved from the cul-de-sac setting to what we call our outside houses and eventually into our transition home. So we have another unique setting in which we can move someone from a very intense behavioral, hands-on approach to eventually getting them to a transition home where they have some unsupervised time, helping them reach their goals to eventually go back out into the community. And that is what happened with Troy. He moved from our cul-de-sac setting with a very intense set of therapies going on out into our outside houses, eventually into our transition home, and Troy successfully graduated from our program and is no longer in need of the waiver services and is now on his own in the community and functioning very well. So we're very pleased and happy to talk with you about Troy.
Thank you, Mimi. Time is also taken away from serving our participants, as they were speaking about it before us, ensuring that documents are completed correctly. Technical errors include making it, if you have an error, not correctly correcting the error, forgetting your credentials, forgetting to put AM or PM, things like that on documents that end up being recouped from the provider when we know we gave the service. And it just, the staff member, and I think Mimi's going to talk a little bit about it, is that our staff they're so worried about making sure not to have those issues that it takes away from the time that they actually need to be helping the people that we serve.
Yeah, and I can speak to this personally, and I wanted to just stand up and give a standing O for these last two ladies that spoke, because I can echo all of their concerns. Pre-COVID, my staffing, I had about 190 staff. Currently, post-COVID, I'm sitting at about 120 staff. It has been very, very, very difficult. Not only difficult for our participants, but also for our staff who have families at home and relationships, their spouses, their significant others, their children, their home life, everything about their life, the work-life balance, has been very difficult with this staffing struggle. But in the meantime, and I do want to applaud Appendix K and the Cabinet for allowing some flexibilities, because I think they truly do understand the difficulties that we're up against. But I myself have been working in the homes. I do serve as a program director, and I have many, many administrative responsibilities. You've heard some of those: incident reporting, things that happen, things that we have to monitor. But I've had to be in the homes because someone has got to be in the homes. So I have spent many hours in the homes with these individuals. They all have their own person-centered plan. They all have their goals. They all have things that they want to do. They all have a life. They want to reach their goals. I'm there to help them reach their goals. Our DSPs are there to help them reach their goals. But as I'm working with them, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, am I doing everything on that paper to make sure that I don't get recouped for this service? It could be as simple as what has been mentioned. Was it AM or was it PM? Did I put LST or do I put PD? Do I make sure that I have met that this goal was met, and with how many Qs, and was it mid or mod? You know, there's all of these technical difficulties that make it very difficult. And just one example is I had an individual in one home that was trying to work toward his goal of his ADLs. I was trying to help him. I had another with a behavior outburst because he knows his medications are due at 7 o'clock, and he wants them at 7, not 7:01. He wants them at 7. That's what he's conditioned to. I have another that's hungry. He's not getting his meal at the exact time that he feels he needs his meal. He also needs to go to the bathroom. I'm really trying to make sure that I'm getting to all three of these people and helping them meet their needs. And in the back of my mind, I'm very concerned about these technical errors on my paperwork, because I'm wondering, at the end of the day, I'm the program director. I'm setting the example. I'm in the home. I want to make sure I'm taking care of the participants, but I'm also wanting to make sure that I'm not going to get recouped. So all of those things are going through my mind as I'm really trying to help these three folks navigate through their evening and help meet their goals.
Thank you, Mimi. Another topic we'd like to address is provider growth. I know that we're always looking for new providers for all of our waivers. And to attract more, that, we are a proponent of making some operational regulations more streamlined. For example, in the SCL, they now have water temperatures within the home based on that individual service plan, where ABI says it has to be below 120 degrees. So if you want it to be a provider of both ABI and SCL, there's a little bit of just things that don't kind of jive up with that. Along those same lines, if you are a long-term provider in one waiver, it would be nice to be able to be a provider of another waiver in a more streamlined effect. Right now, it's a little challenging to go between the waivers. And I do know DMS is working on this, and I'll be interested to see what Pam says next month when she's talking about redesign, because I know they've been working very hard on trying to get some of these operational things streamlined between providers, but I also want to make sure that as we do that, we maintain that difference, that the services we provide in ABI are much different than the services that are provided in other waivers. Also, during this time, as far as the regulation, Cabinet has been more than flexible and just kind of focusing on the spirit of the law and not being as rigid as they may have been prior to COVID. It's been a tremendous relief for our staff, since, as everybody keeps talking about, bare bones staff, we've always had that. One thing that we haven't been able to understand, though, in our waiver is that nursing supports are not available for our acute brain injury waivers, and which is a little odd, because we do get people with fresh injuries that do require a nurse to do a lot of different things, and that medical component is just an unfunded service that we provide to our people on the waivers, since it is not a funded service within the acute waiver. Also want to say, just as everybody else, the enhanced residential rate has been invaluable. As someone previously testified, that our programs typically would go to adult day during the day, Monday through Friday, and we did not do that during COVID, and that staffing, it's just been invaluable to us. So again, I want to thank you for that. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about our nursing department.
Yes, we are, as far as neurorestorative goes, out of the 6 programs we have in Kentucky, Paducah Neurorestorative is the only program that has 24/7 nursing. Now, let me clarify that when I say 24/7 nursing, please don't imagine 3 or 4 nurses in our homes. I'm talking a couple of nurses, 2 or 3 during the day. We've got some med techs, and then I have 1 nurse that is there overnight for anywhere from 43 to 48 patients. Keep in mind, because of that, because we have that cul-de-sac setting, we are able to take folks that are more medically challenged or more behaviorally challenged, and we are seeing more and more of that. Someone mentioned earlier they're having to be very careful about the folks that they consider admitting into their facility, because once you admit them, you are saying you can take care of them. So I'm beginning to be much more careful about who I say that I can take care of, because I don't know if I can with the limited amount of funding or no funding that my nurses are getting. We have folks coming in with feeding tubes, pressure sores, they're coming with oxygen, they're coming in with similar things that they go into nursing home or hospital settings with, and that is becoming more and more the case. Now, if I've got someone on the acute waiver, I cannot bill those nursing services, but I still have to take care of that participant. They've got to have their insulin checked. They've got to have their insulin. They have to have their medications. We have to get them to the physician. Right now, I have 2 individuals that have cancer. One is going through radiation. One is going through chemo. She has a very rare form of melanoma with a not good outlook. I also have an individual that is in kidney failure, going through dialysis, and very sadly, we have watched him. We don't know if he will die from renal failure or if he will die from the dialysis itself. And it's very sad that my DSP has to call me from the home in tears saying, I feel like I'm on death watch. These are just some of the things that we're seeing, that we are very limited with our staffing, but the staff that we do have are very committed. So it's very difficult for them to watch some of our folks go through this process. And it would be lovely if we could have some funding for our acute waiver clients on the nursing with nursing supports, and also with some physical therapy supports. The long-term waiver clients do get those supports, but our acute waiver clients do not.
To kind of further what Mimi's talking, ABI doesn't offer any kind of exceptional supports, and you heard from the previous person testifying that it's a cumbersome process for SEL to get that exceptional supports. We don't get that in ABIB at all, and as Mimi's program, she can talk a little bit more about how they're aging and how those behaviors get a little bit more difficult to manage and some of the challenges we face with that.
Sure. Of course, we know with traumatic brain injury, there's lots of comorbidities there. They're coming in with many things going on that are challenging to them other than just their TBI. But as they age, in which we've had many of our clients in our program more than 10 years, their behaviors become worse. We see that. It's common. But as they move from the acute to the long-term waiver, their services become less, but their behaviors become worse. And so we're having to pull their counseling and behavior services because their units are cut, but we're seeing them act out more and more aggressively. And I have a staff that just last week was hurt very badly by one of our participants, and she's now out of work. But we're seeing these units cut to where counseling and behavior cannot address these issues. And I'm in a position where I'm going, I don't know that I can keep this participant in our program safely, because not only is our staff not safe, but neither are his housemates. So we're seeing that issue as they age out. I'm at that point where I'm not sure what do I do with these folks that are becoming more behaviorally challenged, and I can't even get our local hospital or either our mental health providers to help us either, because they see us as the brain injury expert. They see us as the ones that should be able to handle these issues, and we just do not have the supports to do that. So as a program director, I'm perplexed on how to keep my staff safe, how to keep my other participants safe, and how to make this a program that's truly a community-based rehabilitation program. We are moving people from point A to point B and hopefully back to their families and to their community and having a full life again. Many of them will not go home. Many of them do not have families that are involved. We are their families, and I will tell you, as a program director and as a person of faith, my heart will not allow me to disregard these folks that do not have the family members that are involved with them. I did not imagine in my career that I would be standing at bedsides of individuals who are aging out in our program for different reasons, coming down with different illnesses, like I've said, cancer, renal disease. I've literally stood at the bed, held their hands, prayed with them, sang Amazing Grace as they've taken their last breath. And this is becoming increasingly difficult for many of our staff, because we're seeing the impact of what this is doing to them personally and also professionally. And I do think this is a contribution also to why we're seeing some of our staffing issues, not just related to COVID. It's becoming an increasingly harder job to do, to walk these people through the rest of their life and into their death.
And just to wrap it up, I would like to thank Pam Smith and the entire ABI Department of Medicaid for supporting our programs. I would like to say that I'm excited about Appendix K and what might be able to carry over after that. And after reading the FMAP recommendations, I'm full support of what they're trying to do. And again, thank everybody.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony. Okay, between you four, I have so many different pages of notes, and I don't know if any of my questions are going to make sense because I was trying to write down furiously. But one of the things, did I hear correctly testimony that CHFS is regulating and recouping through guidance letters to providers? And if so, do the providers, are they having input into that process? And is this acceptable? Because I thought we had kind of a regulatory process that we should be going through that allowed for input. So if someone could kind of clarify what those guidance letters are versus the regulatory process, I would be appreciative.
We have had that happen, and I can submit back exact examples. Ha! So during COVID, I never learned to turn on the Zoom. Just saying, how many times did I keep myself muted? So we have had that example happen, and we can share that.
Okay.
But Yes, there has been memos, and so when there's been auditors, because there's multiple auditors, there's not just one. So there's, so if I'm in the SCL waiver, I might have an SCL audit. I might have a Dale that's over PDS, and then I might also have Medicaid. So there's multiple people that oversee the services and give direction into how that's provided, and then whether or not it's recoupable. So I can get specific examples, but I don't have them today. Yes.
That would be great. I just want to make sure that, whatever we do is, it also has that provider component to it, that we're not, it's a partnership, and I think it needs to be a partnership. So,
And if I may, Senator, I
Yes.
would look to add on to that point a
Yeah.
moment. I think a wonderful example, we've talked about the flexibilities that we've been offered through Appendix K. There was directives that came down as guidance for our day training, but we were never told if we could be recouped for not following this guidance. It's a recommendation, but it was a very strong recommendation. And whenever we asked if we were going to be recouped for not following this, we could not get that answer.
okay. Yeah, and I think we need to make sure that our communication is very clear and direct, and that we do have answers. Okay, that was one of the things that popped out for me. The other thing, too, is, the last two meetings, we just have this overwhelming 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is staffing. It's just a beast that we have to figure out how to handle. And I think one piece of that staffing is clearly an increase in provider reimbursements. But is there any other strategies that we can talk about with maybe how we can keep that workforce or expand that workforce? I think I heard one of you all mention kind of credentialing across the waivers. Do you have any ideas about staffing and keeping that workforce strong or making it stronger?
I think one of the things that I would say is documentation. While we need documentation to support the work that we do, I think we need to be mindful in how much documentation we require. Because again, if you're people over paper, paper over people, which are you choosing? And so if they feel that they can actually spend time and not be so worried about all of the documentation, and I do know that we have to have documentation.
Sure.
So I'm not saying throw out everything, but I think we need to be reasonable in the scope of what we're asking for. I do think that that's a burden for our direct care staff.
Okay.
I would also comment on the ratios that we're able to support. So one staff person supporting 3 individuals in a home, as you can imagine, is quite intimidating whenever you have those varying levels of support. So being able to have a higher reimbursed service so that we can provide real staff support in the home is significant.
Okay.
I have experience with waivers in Indiana as well, and I've had feedback from direct support professionals who are interested in coming to work in the Kentucky waiver system, and they note the administrative burden as a reason they do not want to hold employment in Kentucky for this population.
Okay, that's good to know.
And I'll just jump off hers too, because as Mimi was talking about the behaviors that we are dealt with no exceptional supports whatsoever, it's just not financially feasible for us at the current, at the pre-COVID rate to be able to support more than one staff that's in those homes. And unfortunately, we do have injuries of staff, and some people leave, I've had them walk off shift because they got punched in the face, and they leave and don't come back.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Senator Meredith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and ladies, thank you for your testimony. And to my recollection, I've never met any of you, but I know for your testimony today, you're special people. People don't stay in this profession unless they have a passion and commitment and love for the people they take care of, and I'm truly impressed by that. You folks are to be commended. As with our first speaker, Ms. Haberman, you folks truly are angels walking on the face of the earth, and I appreciate the job you do. Just a couple comments, Madam Chair. First, Ms. Butterfield said she would hope we could find some straightforward regulations. I'm sorry, that's an oxymoron. It's contradictory terms. There is no such thing, but I share your passion there because I've been preaching since I came here in 2017 that, we spend 30 cents of every healthcare dollar on the administration of healthcare in this country. That's double what other nations spend, and it's ridiculous. And you mentioned some regulations, and obviously there's a mountain of regulations there. I think what you're going to have to do, or somebody's going to have to do, is try to establish some priorities, watch the biggest issues, and let us work through a laundry list that way, because I know we could talk about this all day long and still not get to the root of it. But I reminded my first year here, our good friend and colleague, Senator Steve West, told me that every law we pass has unintended consequences. I think it's the same way with regulations. When they're written, there's some intent, and there's probably good intent, but it goes way beyond what was originally meant, and we need to take a hard look at those. So if you can give some priority to those, identify those for us, I think that'll be some benefit. But lastly, I've been in healthcare I was in healthcare for 40 years, and I don't think anybody in healthcare ever imagined that the wage scale of the fast food industry would be the standard that we would aspire to. That truly is a sad commentary on modern society and where we are with establishing priority for services. But I understand the challenge. Everyone right now is having these challenges, but obviously not as severe as possibly you have. The numbers that you gave us, 190 down to 120, that's just staggering and so difficult to do. So that certainly emphasizes the challenges you have in front of you. So just want to tell you, I appreciate the work you do, understand the challenges you have, and hopefully we can bring this to the forefront and get some resolution for you. But thank you for your testimony today. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Meredith. And we don't have any more questions, but I just kind of want to conclude this last panel with really the hope that we are all committed to finding new and better ways to do things. I think that the cabinet is committed to finding new and better ways to doing things, and I appreciate you and what you do and sticking with us and holding out hope, because we are all very committed to finding. Yes, Senator Meredith, he has to keep talking.
Well, you put me on this committee. Just to your point, I want to commend Ms. Smith and Ms. Johnson. Your testimony today was refreshing to know that you want to look outside the box and do things differently. We have to do things differently. So I found that very encouraging, and just want to thank you for your testimony as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and so keep the faith. We'll keep the partnership going, holding hands and making progress every month. And so I appreciate it. But before we adjourn today, I do want to make a note that to the committee members or task force members that there were some communications that were received. They were received late, but they had to deal with some of the issues that we dealt with today. And our agenda was full. As you see, we went a full 2 hours. So I'm going to have the task force staff make sure that everybody has a copy of those. So if you just know that some late communications is coming into your inbox, I would appreciate that. Taking a look. And anything else before we adjourn? Okay, and our next meeting is August 23rd at 1 p.m. August 23rd, 1 p.m. Mark it down. And if there are no objections, then we stand adjourned.
Stiff, 2 hours. He was online. He watched online.
Coach. Hey, how's it going? How you doing, buddy? Doing all right. Unfortunately, I was down your way. Oh, yeah.